It's good to listen in today. It has been quite some time since I came back from Uganda, yeah, it also brings up a lot of memories, and also yeah, I feel in my heart also the pain that all of you are also feeling. I started in Uganda in January 2019. Went there together with my wife. My wife worked with an NGO, was the country director, and I joined her. I was a consultant, worked in more internationally, different countries. All of it focused on issues of good governance. And I decided to apply for a job in Uganda after I realized that working abroad while I was staying in Uganda was a little bit silly. I thought, why not put my energy a bit more towards the promotion of democracy in Uganda itself. So I started in January 2020 with the Democratic Governance Facility. And the Democratic Governance Facility is or it was, it actually has been dissolved now. It was a donor-funded initiative, 7 donors, European Union, and 6 European countries funded it. It was funding a lot of civil society initiatives, but also a number of government initiatives. It was not, therefore, kind of biased more towards one or the other, but it tried to really balance a bit its investments, reasoning from the perspective that if you want to promote democracy, you have to work on both sides. You have to work on the demand side, but also on the supply side. When I started, I also had the responsibility in my portfolio to support the observation of the elections by civil society. So I started with that. I have experience with that also from past work experiences, amongst others also in Rwanda. And I started to kind of reach out to different civil society organizations, and I already came to the conclusion that the chance of having a fair election was minimal. And why do I say this? Because there were so many efforts already on its way, early 2020, to avoid civil society to come together and form a new local election observation mission. And despite of that, I did succeed in stimulating civil society organizations to come together and to form a new coalition to observe the elections. I think this has been observed by the regime. Well, I don't think so, but I'm pretty sure it was. Because when I left for holidays in the summer of 2020, and I thought, okay, when I come back, I can actually start with this newly formed coalition for the elections, for the observation of the elections towards the end of August, and prepare for the disbursement of a large number of local observers across the country. I had difficulties of returning back to Uganda. And what turned out to be, well, what I thought started off as a technicality turned out to be an actual political blockade. So I was unable to return to Uganda, do my work, and support the local observation of the elections. So since August 2020, I worked with Ugandan society, civil society, supporting them to observe the elections. And in that process, and I first did that from the Netherlands, then I moved to Kenya and worked from Kenya to support the election process. We were able to still build up this civil society coalition, But then when it also became clear to the regime that it was actually able to continue its preparations, they actually they actually took the decision to officially ban this coalition of civil society organizations. There was no legal basis for it. It was a clear departure from what was allowed during all the previous elections. So this was a big blow for the civil society organizations that had joined this network. So I thought, well, what can we still do? So we decided to still work together, but not under a formal umbrella. So we decided to support different organizations in a very similar way to deploy local observers. When that also became clear to the regime, they decided to block the bank accounts of two of the major organizations that we worked with. So there was another step to avoid the observation of the elections. Well, I was not deterred by that. I thought there must be a way to still have local observers observe the elections. So I worked with other partners that we have and redirected the funds to them. I had made sure that we had very clear ways of accountability. My donors, the ambassadors of the seven donors, were very, very reluctant to continue this process of supporting local observers. But together with, I think, two ambassadors that were really pushing for this, that we should continue with this, I was able to make money available to other organizations to deploy local observers. So on election day, we actually had quite a large number of local observers available to observe the elections. So what was the final attempt to avoid this from taking place? Accreditation. Many of the local observers didn't get accreditation. Nonetheless, they did do observations, and some of them did get accreditation from the local level because they had very good contacts. So they were able to actually, on election day, do their observations. They were starting to send in their observations, their observation reports. The center, the place that we had made, that we had turned into an election observation telecenter in Kampala, in the Africana Hotel, then got raided by the police. 26 members of civil society from the different civil society organizations were arrested. The person that was responsible for the electronic tallying of all the observation results decided to flee from Kampala to a safe location to make sure that he could continue processing all the reports that came in. So the data was actually there to give a judgment on the elections. But then, because of all the pressure that was put on the different civil society organizations, different people were called into police stations, offices were raided, all these things were happening. In the end, no report has been published by civil society while they actually had the data. So this is for me kind of also to make clear that it was pre-planned to make sure that these elections were rigged. There was a lot of effort put into it to make sure that observation would not be possible. The international observers were refused. The observers from the embassy of the US embassy, 70% of them did not get their accreditation, and therefore the Americans decided not to observe the elections locally from the embassy. The Diplo Watch mission decided not to call their visits to different voting stations an observation exercise because they didn't want to legitimize the elections. So I can say that from different donors, from the different embassies, there was a very clear understanding that these elections were not going to be free and fair, that the outcome would not be legitimate. But in the end, after the elections, they were put for into a situation where they were attacked directly by the president, accusing them from having a conspiracy with Bobby Wine, with the NUP, with supporting his Plan B. The Plan B that the regime tried to uncover through all these kidnappings and torturing people. And I myself was also supposed to be part of that conspiracy. The first time that I have ever met the Honorable Bobby Wine was last year. What was it, Nico? December, November?
Yes, in the beginning of December, we met in Amsterdam.
Yes, that was the first time that I met him. Never ever have I had direct contact with the NUP, with Bobby Wine whatsoever. I've always tried to be as objective as possible. And I'm not saying neutral because I don't believe in neutrality when you talk about democracy. I'm talking about objectivity. I try to be professional and objective. What I find interesting with this conversation and also with some other conversations that Nico invited me into is that I feel that a lot of you keep on proving that water is wet. You keep on trying to get more and more evidence that these elections are rigged, that Museveni is a dictator. It's clear. And it's clear to many donors. The sad thing is, Uganda, unfortunately, is too unimportant to really care about that. And this also aligns a bit with kind of that racist notion that was mentioned earlier, but it also has to do with interests. The economic, political interests into Uganda from the West are not that big. They are not that big. The economy of Uganda is as big as the smallest province of the Netherlands. It is not extremely important to the West. But on the other hand, it is too important to leave it alone or to even allow an unknown transition, an unknown political transition towards democracy to take place. And I find that very saddening. I find it very, very depressing to actually to realize that Uganda is not getting the attention that it deserves, and therefore it will not be allowed also to develop into a full democracy because interests are so limited. And I followed it also after I ended my job with DGF last year in March. I kept on following the developments, but I have not seen any outspoken interest into Uganda from the outside world. I'm very happy to hear from Milton how you make suggestions, how to put Uganda higher on the political agenda. I have made similar efforts to a lot of civil society organizations, people that I know that I've come to know in Uganda, people that I have become friends with, to urge them to put Uganda on the political agenda of Dutch parliaments, of the Dutch parliament, of the German parliament, of the European Parliament again. The question that was raised to the European member of Parliament of what happened after that very strong vocal resolution about Uganda. There is no follow-up. The next thing comes up, and I have noticed it even with NGOs. Friends that I have in Dutch NGOs contacted me about the election process in Uganda, but the moment that there was a coup d'etat in Myanmar, the attention went away.
But what strong statement, Marco, do you refer to?
The statement of the European Parliament about the elections.
Right.
But also the US has made a very strong statement about the elections.
Correct.
I know, and maybe other European donors haven't made very strong statements, but I know from the ambassadors that I've spoken to that they were really, really, really upset with the election process, and that they are not kind of out there to kind of hug again with Museveni. Museveni was attacking them. He was making.
They didn't really show it because what we saw was Pacifici saying that the elections were so orderly, and other ambassadors congratulating Museveni on his win.
Yeah, kind of this is also one of the problems that I see in terms of the donor community. The donor community is not kind of one thing. The donor community is an embassy, is a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is a parliament, is a public opinion and the civil society in the home country, our companies. All of that comprises a donor. And an embassy is doing what it is also told to do by their ministries of foreign affairs. And if the Ministry of Foreign Affairs say, don't rock the boat, they don't rock the boat. But Marco, it's not that they are happily kind of, living together again with Museveni. But I, and Nico, we have talked about this as well. I am frustrated. I'm frustrated to the level that I've decided to redirect my career into another area because I don't see progress happening anymore after 20 years in this area of democratization. It breaks my heart to admit it.
Can I, Marco?
Yes, please.
Marco, thank you so much for that powerful presentation. But before you move 100% into focusing in another area, are there some final suggestions? First of all, actually, one question. Can something still be published based on the information that was collected by the civil society, number one? Number two, what final observations would you have for Ugandan civil society in terms of what they should continue to do? Perhaps there's some things that they've not been doing adequately. So based on like your farewell observation, what would you say to that?
Yeah, well, what I have said is make sure that you are in direct contact with the European Parliament. I have offered my support also in that to help them with connections, but somehow the fear of being exposed and therefore being also a target for the government, for the regime, is so big that there is self-censorship. So you can only do such a thing if you work, I think, together within the region to have others, for example, in Kenyan civil society, to help to bring across the message. I've also made those suggestions. The sad thing is, Ugandan civil society is quite diverse. There is a section of Ugandan civil society that is driven by ideals. Unfortunately, it's not the biggest part. There is also a part of civil society that is more so-called professional. They do their jobs. But when they don't get paid anymore, they don't do their job anymore. Or when the pressure becomes too high on them and their families are threatened, they also give in or give up. And honestly, I cannot blame them. I basically did the same. I've been, my family got attacked in August 2021. Our house got attacked during the night, a violent robbery. I was not there. My wife was there. My children were there. That was for us also the final moment that we said, now, we have to leave here. There's nothing that we can do anymore. And I can understand that for Ugandan activists, this is even a bigger pressure. They are more vulnerable than I am. I can escape and I can return to my country. So some sort of protection for those that are willing to put their lives on the line is necessary. That's one. And those contexts internationally, they do matter. The other thing that also matters is putting pressure on the embassies to come up with an alternative for DGF. DGF has been appreciated by the civil society organizations as a force to support them. Now that it stopped, a lot of them are on the brink of death. And there should be an alternative. You can fund them in a similar way with a basket funding from, for example, from Kenya, a regional initiative where you support it's not within the country, but from abroad. Then it's also not possible for the president anymore, for Museveni, to block it and to say, well, you're not allowed anymore to work. And that happened with DGF. It got closed down, and that closure lasted for a year.
There's a request by Mary to not refer to Museveni as president anymore.
Well, I mean, you can say he's president. You can say only that he's not the rightly elected president. I mean, we have so many presidents in the world that are not duly elected. Huh? So, I feel and hear you, Nico, but
no, I think you've shared very useful information, Marco. You've been very, very, very frank and very, very useful. And we'll see how we can use some of this information.
Yes, and I think it was Desmond that was asking if you've written down your story or you plan to write it down.
Sorry, Nico?
There was a question by Desmond if you plan to write down your story, because it's a very interesting story.
Yeah, well, I have to admit that it has taken me some time to grieve. And it has taken me some time. And I actually have to say that Nico helped me also to kind of get to the end of my grief period. Yeah, it really, I really invested myself into this process from 2020, from January 2020 till till after the elections, until say August 2021, and yeah, it has taken some time for me to kind of digest everything, to kind of find my own life again and put it back on track in the Netherlands. I have given this a lot of consideration. One of the reasons why I also decided to join this afternoon is also because I want to share. I want to share what happened to me, but also my perspective, and also this cry to, yeah, also what I would say the Western societies, because if we talk about donors, we think it is almost like a person who is pulling the strings. But the difficulty is that there is so much complexity behind a so-called donor It's a country with different interests and different institutions that require influencing. And the influencing is not always done by presenting them the facts and the atrocities, but also more the emotions. And I think that's what we need to figure out. How do we do that in such a way that we can make clear that what we are now doing in Europe towards Ukraine should also happen towards Uganda.
Right.
And that is simply showing solidarity, putting action with your words. And that's
Marco,
not what's happening with Uganda.
sorry to interrupt. So I've added the pin for the NUP Secretary General David Louis Rubongoya. I don't know if you met him in Amsterdam. I don't think so.
No.
So David Lewis, if you can unmute, I don't know if you have a question for Marco. You heard his story.
Well, I think it's an extremely interesting and very, very sad story, I must say.
Yeah.
Of course, similar to several that I've listened to of other people who are trying to build democracy in Uganda and were either expelled from the country, harassed, attacked, and several things really, really happened to them. But for me, I really want to appreciate you, Marco, for the great work and for your interest in building Ugandan democracy. And maybe to ask and to request that you don't give up, like Milton said. I think we all know that this was going to be very, very frustrating. And I mean, those of us who are involved in this work daily can see how frustrating it is. And there are many times when you feel like giving up. But you ask yourself about these millions of people who are suffering as a result of a military regime, and then you keeping on. So that would be my encouragement to you. I mean, I think I definitely know that you've taken this decision to focus on another path after careful reflection, but I would still think that there's a role, and I'm really, really glad that you are, for example, playing this role right now. And you've also said that you've offered to continue helping, connect us to some people. And thing I think highlight a bit is, one of the questions Ugandans keep asking is, are these ambassadors in Uganda afraid of Museveni? Do they fear for their personal safety even when they have all these forms of immunity? Why is it that, one day they are saying this, he comes on a podium, calls them idiots, calls them quislings and all these other, things he calls them.
Yeah.
And then, 2 days later, he's hosting them at Rashul at his farm. And so you keep asking yourself, why is this going on? So maybe if you could respond to that.
Yeah. No, I've spoken, also quite openly with several ambassadors who were extremely frustrated about their work in Uganda because they felt that they were ridiculed by Museveni, but also not properly supported by their ministries of foreign affairs. I mean, Uganda is not the most powerful country in the world. Let's put it like that. And if you cannot stand up as a European Union, as as 7 donors, to say, sorry, but this is unacceptable. The way that you treat our ambassador is the way that you treat our country. If you expel or you block the entry of a citizen of our country that is working for us as embassies, you are going to cross a line that is unacceptable. It's not happening because it's not regarded as important. The country, unfortunately, is regarded not as important enough. And what happens then at the level of ambassadors, they are trying to think about their career and think, how do I move to another country that is a bit more important for my next posting? And I get there quicker if I don't steer the boat too much. If I don't rock the boat, if I don't, question too much how things are happening, and therefore I'm not going to refuse an invitation to the president's, Nico, to Museveni's farm the moment that I get invited, the week after he called me an idiot. But if it would be up to me, I would say, I'm
A word you can't mention.
Yes. Milton, you could read my mind. Yeah. But I think that's a bit the mechanism that is happening. The kind of the role of a diplomat is also to be diplomatic, to be to keep the relationship ongoing. And as long as Museveni is president and he is accepted internationally as the president, each individual ambassador will work from that notion. And they cannot do that individually differently, because then they will be replaced.
And I have a question, Marco, now for both of you, for David Lewis and for you. Isn't it maybe time that we ask these European countries, do you want us actually to have elections? Because if elections are like the previous election, and let's say there were over 500 deaths, my victim list is over 1,500. If they will, the next elections will be the same, then we know the results and we know the amount of deaths. So shouldn't we ask that question to Europe? What do you want